you very much. So first of all, thanks the organizers for have given me the possibility to talk today about non-Hermitian topological phases in one-dimensional Polariton systems. So first of all the results I'm going to present today have been achieved in collaboration with Vanik Shazanaryan and under the supervision of Michał Matuszewski of the Polariton group here at the Institute of Physics in Warsaw, and with the collaboration of Brzezinski and Tim Yart of the MacTop division here at the department. So during this talk, I will first give you a quick introduction about Hermitian and non-Hermitian topological insulators, with a focus on Polariton systems. In the main part of the talk, I will describe the results that we achieve by our study on pump-induced non-Hermitian Polariton topology. And I will finally describe the possibility to achieve non-Hermitian hand-mode lasing and the condition to have coherent transfer of topological interface states. So very generally, topological insulators are commonly defined as materials which are insulating the bulk, but which are conducting at the edges. In one dimensional, the canonical model is the SSH model. We already saw this in earlier talks. We have an N-site chain, which is subdivided in different unit cells, which hosts two different sites. And actually, the peculiarity of the model is that the topological properties can be defined entirely by the relation between the intracell and the intercell coupling. So the fundamental characteristics of this model is the fact that there is actually correspondence between the topological invariant, which one can extract from the bulk of the system, with the topological invariant of an open chain, so which corresponds to the number of edge states. So that's how the edge states acquires the topological nature. This gives a very strong hint on the nature of the topological phase transition, which is defined as a change of the topological invariant under a continuous transformation, is always associated with the closing of the gap. It's worth noting here that all these properties are universal in Hermitian topological insulators. So topological insulators has been both theoretically proposed and experimentally observed in Polariton systems. As an example, we can take two-dimensional layers of different micropillars organized in a honeycomb geometry. The unit cell is composed by two different micropillars, and here the time reversal symmetry is broken by making use of this LT splitting, which kind of induces a photonic spin-orbit interaction. So as the experimentalist also tested, by introducing an external transverse magnetic field, we can open the gap and see edge propagation, which are robust and which circulate around the two-dimensional system. An orbital version of the SSH model has been also investigated by Jacqueline's Bloch group a few years ago, and there they can, by playing with the photonic p orbitals, they can stagger the intercell hoppings and move from topological to trivial. Now, all these works, together with many others, are of course groundbreaking, but actually the topology which is investigated is of a Hermitian nature. So the open-driven dissipative nature of the exciton Polariton system actually doesn't play a massive role. We are, of course, interested in this investigation. In order to do that, we need to understand what is a non-Hermitian topological insulators. So we know very well what is a non-Hermitian Hamiltonian, which is always associated with systems which are non-conserved in energy. And if we have the SSH model, the easiest way to introduce non-hermeticity is to act on the intercell hoppings and by violating the reciprocity. By applying these effects, by applying this violation, we can see an exotic arising of different non-Hermitian effects. For instance, our eigenenergies are not real anymore. Now they survive in the complex plane. We need to redefine the concept of the energy gaps, And also we can see the appearance of exceptional points, which are non-Hermitian degeneracies. Also, the bulk boundary correspondence that's been discussed before, it's generally an open question. So you can find many different non-Hermitian systems which can show different bulk boundary correspondences of different types. And that's why we usually address non-Hermitian system in classes. If one is interested in investigating this physics, one way is to violate this reciprocity in the hoppings of the sites. So introducing this unequal hopping, but this is actually is being found to be hard to implement experimentally. So it's natural to seek another mechanism such that these non-Hermitian nature effects can arise by a periodic modulation of the ratio between the gain and the lossy, for instance. So a very interesting idea has been introduced a few years ago by Takata and Notomi. They consider a one-dimensional chain where the unit cell is not composed by 2 sites, but by 4. Interesting, all the couplings, as you can see, this K are constant. So we don't need to touch these couplings, but it's peculiar in this model is that there is a periodically modulated on-site potential. You can see there is G1 minus G2 minus G1, G2. And in this case is purely imaginary. So without playing with the hoppings, but just with the this on-site modulation, we can actually end up in a situation where we can have phase topological phases. So we have emergence of edge states. We are just coming from the nature which is non-Hermitian. And eventually, by playing with the intensity of the imaginary part of the eigenvalues, we can end up in a situation where we can achieve topological lasing. So our proposal is to investigate non-Hermitian topology, which is stemming only from the driving and decay mechanism, which are so characteristics for exciton polariton condensates. So this is our theoretical model. We consider a one-dimensional chain of micropillars. The unit cell is composed by 4 sites, and in each of these micropillars hosts a tight-bound exciton polariton mode. Now, such system is easily numerically solvable by the classic reservoir coupled to the condensate equation, which we can see down here. So we write down a tight binding non-Hermitian Hamiltonian, and our coupling are all fixed. But instead of a purely imaginary on-site potential, we consider a complex on-site potential, which is modulated in space. What does it mean? We have 2 components, a real component and the imaginary component. The real component mimics the physics of a real potential, which is induced by the interaction of the reservoir, while the imaginary part simulates the balance between the gain and the losses. Now we can parameterize these, how much real part and how much imaginary part do we have in our on-site potential by this parameter theta. As you can see here, for realistic parameters, experimental parameters, theta has to go from 0, has to span in the interval between 0 and pi over 2, and actually is defined by the material of the experiment. Knowing that this theta is function of the scattering of the excitons from the reservoir to the condensate over the interaction between this exciton and polaritons. So now that we brought down our theoretical model, we want to investigate different limits. So our on-site potential can be written like this, epsilon, it's modulated in space. And of course, if we take theta equals 0, we can explore the purely Hermitian limit. While if we take the theta to be pi over 2, we go on the other limits, which is the non-Hermitian limit. So let's focus on theta equals 0. We have the extreme Hermitian limit. Here we can see that there is 4 bands. Our eigenvalues have all real components. The imaginary part is 0, and we can see emergence of 2 edge states. which are protected by some symmetry, and we can define a topological invariant in this situation. So what happens when we go to the non-Hermitian limit? Here we go. We are up here, and now we are in the condition, of course, which is reversed. So all the eigenvalues, actually the two edge states, they don't have a real components, but just imaginary. And let's say the topological invariant is described by some non-Hermitian number. So we studied these two limits. There is emergence of two edges in both limits, but of course we are interested in some middle range. That's because experimentalists would eventually investigate that in some middle range. So we can quickly show you this animation. So if let's say we suppose we are in the Hermitian limit, we start where all the eigenvalues have zero imaginary part, and we turn on our theta, so we approach to the non-Hermitian limit. We can see that the two edge states, they just lays within a complex gap, and they never touch the different bands. Eventually, they reach this situation where is the purely non-Hermitian limit. So we can say that by continuity, these end states exist beyond the limit cases, even if there is two different topological invariants, which is already an exotic fact, but we accept it. The situation completely changes if the strength of the on-site potential actually is close to zero, if we decrease the intensity. So what we have actually is that if we start from the Hermitian limit and we increase theta, which goes towards the non-Hermitian limit, at some point from the band, we will see appearance of other two edge states. So now this is very strange. We end up in a topological phase, which is characterized by four topologically robust states. Eventually, the initial two, if we keep on going up in theta, they will be absorbed inside the gap. Okay, so this is very strange. We try to characterize this, and so what we find is actually that these end states disappear only if the gap between the edge states and the band closes. So what we find is actually that this transition happens in what's called enforced exceptional point. So by following this reasoning by Yokomitsu and collaborators in a recent paper, if we consider an infinitely open chain, we can see that the eigenstate of the of the continuum bands can be actually constructed as standing waves of the bulk block wave functions. But we note that if either the first or the last components of this wave function that goes to zero is exactly there where this phase transition appears. So we have an analytical formula condition to draw this phase boundary, as you can see here by this red color, and then what we can do is take in our theoretical results and compare with numerics. So we take an open system, 100 unit cell, we span all over different values of theta, we count the number of edges, and we can see that there is a remarkable agreement between the numerics and the theory. Of course, there is some discrepancies due to finite size effects. So we have established a new bulk boundary correspondence for Polariton non-Hermitian systems. Is it possible to also demonstrate topological lasing? Of course. Let's say we found a set of parameters in the G1, G2 plane such that we have the edge states, which has the highest imaginary value of the energy. Well, then we just need to apply a shift in this imaginary plane by adding some losses, such that we end up in a situation where this is the only positive value within all the different eigenvalues of the spectrum. If we take this configuration, we plug it inside the driven dissipative Gross-Pitayevsky equation, starting from some white noise, we can see that actually this mode will be the only one surviving, while the other modes, as we can see here in a time simulation, all the other modes will decay in time. So this is demonstration of topological lasing. So now very quickly, I will show some...
2 minutes, Paolo. Yes.
Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, excellent. So very quick, super quickly. I will discuss some results about, preliminary results about possibility to achieve coherent transfer of topological interface states. So what is an interface state? We know that if we have two topological phases, this interface state, it sits in the junction of these topological phases, okay? So we want to, investigate this. We want to investigate how we can maximize the coherent transfer in a possible switch from one to another unit cell. So we take an interface state such that he has the highest imaginary value, such that at steady state he will be the only one surviving, so the other modes will be dead. And we try to understand the condition such that this transfer can take place. So we act as switching, we implement a switching protocol to switch from one unit cell to the other, with also some assistance from some extra pump. So we take a stochastic Rossby-Tyersky equation, which is the model I discussed before. We dress it with some white noise by means of the truncated Wigner approximation. This noise kind of accounts for quantum fluctuation. So we are now able to compute the first order correlation function, both in space and in time. So what we are interested in is computing this correlation function along the time evolution, but and see what is the best way to address the shift in the coherence. So in this plot, I show the coherence, the temporal coherence, as a function of the switching time. And we can see that for different switching time, there is actually an optimal time scale for this coherent transfer, which comes from the interplay of the switching time and the coherence time, which is intrinsic of the driven dissipative system, even at the steady state. Finally, we studied the two unit cell switching. So you can see that we start from one unit cell, and then we, if we calculate the G1 in time on the initial unit cell, we can see that after multiple transition, this will be completely washed out, as you can see from this blue curve. While if we compute G1 from unit cell 1 and unit cell 3, we can see that by this supporting pumping, we have actually transfer of coherence from the first to the last unit cell. So with these slides, I would like to conclude and to summarize our results. So from the study of this non-Hermitian topology in Polariton system, we could characterize the emergence of non-Hermitian topology, which stems only from a spatial periodic modulation of the pump. So we don't need actually to play with the hoppings, but just with the modulation of the pump. We are able to establish a topological phase diagram and the new bulk boundary correspondence. And finally, we demonstrated the possibility to have non-Hermitian topological end-mode lasing, and what are the conditions for maximizing the coherence if we want to transfer one domain waltz from one unit cell to the other one. And with this, two references, if you are more interested about this work, I will thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Paolo, for the very nice talk. Okay, as usual, it's time for questions. Okay, so there are no questions, so maybe I will try to ask one myself. Mm-hmm. So in fact, if I understand, you are using this modulation of imaginary part in order to mimic somehow this SSH physics, but in a new way, yes. What was not very clear for me is on this phase diagram, in fact, what are you plotting exactly in some sense?
So
No, maybe the previous slide you have. Yes, this first one. Yes. What you have? Yes. What do you plot here?
Okay, so here I plot it's the phase diagram. You see on this axis we have G2, which is the strength of on one of the modulations. Here we have the condition G1 is equal to modulus to G2.
Yes.
Okay, so we can just fix one parameter. On the other, we change theta. So theta is given by this ratio and gives, from 0 to pi over 2, we can span over these limits.
Yes,
so what
it's clear, yes.
Yeah, so what we plot here is, these are the number of edge states that we find in these particular areas of the phase diagram.
Okay. Okay. So 1 plus 1 means that you have
means that I have one edge on the left and one on the right.
Okay, it's always
and
symmetric.
This is, yes, and this is what I showed here, right? There is two edges, one is red and the other is green. If we just span from theta 0 to pi over 2 far from G2 equals 0, we have that this is continuous. We have a continuous. Okay. While if we go and we shift, let's say we change theta, but closer to a smaller value of G2, we have these exotic phases. So this is what I tried to show you when I was showing this. Here, when we change and we increase theta, we can see that there is no topological exotic phases. We just go from one limit to the other. By continuity, we characterize the different number of edge states. Okay. In this other case, it's completely different. Here is where we have this G2 is very close to 0. And then there is, you see at some point, emergence of other two edge states. So here we have 4 edge states, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. So if we go back to this phase diagram, we are just entered from here, because I brought you from the Hermitian point, I'm entered this phase. So you see this is 2 pi 2. So 2 on the left, 2 on the right. And then eventually, if we keep on increasing, I can go out this phase and go back to the 1 plus 1 phase, which is this one. And I can show you here, I just keep on increasing theta. And that's because 2 edges are just get merged to the band. And eventually we end up with the non-Hermitian limit. So these are the number of edge states. And of course, the topological invariant, which characterize the number of edge states.
Okay. Other questions? Dima, you want to ask or no?
Well, in fact, I have looked at the time and it looks like we are past the time for the next talk. So I have decided not to ask right now. But it was about this numerical phase diagram, which is on the next slide. And I was wanting, this one, my idea was to ask if this blue part, which means 0 edge states, is reduced if you increase the system size, or it persists.
Yes. This is just finite size. Yeah. We check this. So we just increase the system size. We can see, this red area reaching this corner. We can see this green leaf to increase.
Yes. Is it right that for very small interactions, the size of the interactions, for very small modulation, the size of the edge states becomes larger and larger?
The size of the edge states, you mean the density of the edge states?
No, the special, the decay.
The exponential decay.
Mm-hmm. They are less and less localized.
Yes, they are less and less localized. Exactly.
I see.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I should disconnect now.